So a letter to Jan. Jan Meisner is a very exceptional and special person, I think. So January 22, New York was still empty, slowly waking up from the long anesthesia that the pandemic gave us. During my visit, I decided to do everything by foot, more than ever, a good decision in a city where it became difficult to find cabs. In the morning of January the 18th, my colleague Tanja Boon and I walked from the Bowery to Harrison Street 14 to visit the studio of Richard Nonas. Before the pandemic, Olivier Franquin repeatedly asked me if I would be interested to meet Richard Nonas. The answer was yes. The pandemic decided, though, that between the promise and action, several years passed. But finally, the visit happened on this day in January 22. Unfortunately, the artist could not be present. Richard Nonas passed on the 11th of May, 2021. I have to admit that on the way to the studio in Tribeca, I felt nervous and a bit insecure. Who am I to enter the studio of an artist in the midst of the complex and sometimes rich process of mourning of the ones he loved? Is it appropriate to invade the studio of an artist whom I never met during his lifetime? As long as one is carrying questions with oneself, I said to myself, there are reasons to do what you should do. And there, Tanja and I were in front of the door of Harrison Street 14. Nonas is written on the left part of the door, and a funny painted profile of a dog on the lower side of the door made me immediately feel at home. I have a specific relation with these four-legged animals called dogs. You were there, Jan, and Alison's Palace of the Fergus McCaffrey Gallery, all of us still equipped with our masks and keeping the distance we have been taught to keep during the pandemic. We never met before, and there we were in the studio, this cave, like inside the body of a whale. Looking back, I do know that it must not have been evident to open the studio to two total strangers of Belgium. Everything in the studio was still briefing Richard, and always will. And it felt like that every moment Richard could enter and make some coffee for all of us. This sounds sentimental, but it isn't.
And why?
It tells us something about the quality of the place, about the living capacities, the fact that the place is real, tangible, daily, direct. The first 10 minutes were, for all of us, a bit uncomfortable, a bit awkward, because who wants what from whom, who is expecting what from whom, with which intentions? For all of us, I think we quickly understood that nothing was wanted, nothing was needed. We shared fragments in the spectrum called fragility. We shared a common interest and respect in Richard Nonas, and by consequence, a fascination in life, in trying to understand how things are linked. The four of us were surrounded by artworks, fragments of artworks, ethnographic objects, tools, hundreds of tools, books, cassettes, chopsticks turned into sculptures, and all this in a light quality which might remind us of the ancient caves. At a certain moment of time, you, in the course of our conversation, Jan, you were wondering or even convinced that Richard and I must have met. There were some serendipitous synchronicities or parallel interests, in wooden sticks, for instance, that made you think we met. And I do regret I didn't meet Richard, because I felt home in the studio, and I considered the visit as a guiding moment, a track of inspiration, as something that reminded me why I do what I do. Still today, December 3rd, I take this visit with me, if only for the 3 words mentioned in the studio, all words suck. If only for all the questions that my visit proposed. Richard Nonas was an artist adding nothing to what is there on the planet. He was reorganizing things, giving materials, steels, wood, stone, a certain order, a certain direction, a repetition. He liberated the materials from the decorative, functional, instrumental burden of architecture and human construction. He created space and mind and being, reminded us to notions of scale in a holistic perspective. He taught us forms of generosity, reminded us that being an artist is in the first place a way of living. The subjects we discussed in the studio while drinking coffee in a Nonas-made cup and stirring with a Nonas-made spoon are private and discreet. In a world where so many things are replaceable and all things look alike, also the conversations being activated, I share with you, that's us, all of us, you, but also Jan in New York, that this moment happened and how meaningful it was. Leaving the door of the studio with regret, we knew we would meet again. We had to meet again. We felt that we started a conversation that should be continued, and that is happening, a part of all the needs and the wants of the art world. We touched each other as human beings who have the conviction that you get a better person by dealing with art. Finally, before all my words maybe start to suck, one more thing. If I would name 5 moments who marked me forever as someone working in the art world, then this would be the following. Meeting with David Hammonds and discussing Marcel Duchamp when I was still more than a junior in the art world. Spending a week in Death Valley in California with Maria Nordman doing performances at the moment of the sunrise. Spending 2 weeks with Ilya Kabakov in a small German city where just the 2 of us were and nothing else happens. And Kendall Geers knows what I'm talking about. Meeting Leon Ferrari in Buenos Aires and being so ignorant, not knowing that I had a radical pioneer in front of me. And finally meeting Richard Nonas, a meeting that never happened, but that definitely took place. Thank you very much.